As our narrative unfolds in 1 Samuel, we find Samuel as a young apprentice in the temple. How he comes to be in the temple as an apprentice at such a young age is a bit of a mystery. Oh, you might be familiar with the story. His mother Hannah prayed and prayed and prayed to be blessed with a child for more than a few years. She was the object of ridicule from her husband's other wives. It was back in the day. And quite honestly, from her whole community, because it appeared she could not bear children. And there were lots of expectations around that, as there are even now. She cried often, prayed fervently, and struck a deal with God that if in fact she became pregnant, she would hand the child over to the temple to be raised up by the priest. She would dedicate this child of her heart to the God who would hear her prayer. When I say it's a mystery how Samuel came to be in the temple, I say that speaking as a mother. It's a mystery to me that she would willingly hand over the fulfillment of her dreams. I simply cannot comprehend the depth of her faith. But it's also a mystery because of the role the temple and the priest, Eli, played or didn't play throughout her years of torment and struggle. The temple seems like a natural place to turn in time of need. It is not uncommon that even the least faith-oriented among us in times of desperation look to the church to be there, to be a refuge, a sanctuary, a safety net, when the rest of the world comes across as a total letdown. Hannah is a regular worshiper, a faithful temple goer, active in the ritual and tradition of this holy place. It's not surprising she would turn to the temple, but honestly, from a professional perspective, I am not convinced her faith community or her clergy has done her any favors up till now. Not to be judgmental, but I would be hard-pressed to give Eli or the temple much of a passing grade. The temple itself was falling into disrepair. Everyone assumed that the priest Eli would hand over the reins to his sons, but there were rumors of mismanagement, whispers about misappropriated funds and poorly handled spiritual care. Eli could not have been ignorant of the situation, but he sure didn't lift a finger to improve on anything. He wasn't what you'd call a high-energy pastor. You wouldn't, for instance, find him out doing community theater or directing musicals or chaperoning a youth mission trip or playing percussion on Kenya Sunday. Eli's lamp had not quite gone out, the story says, but visions and ideas and strategic plans, dreams for the future, those were pretty hard to come by. When Hannah came to the temple with her husband, so distraught over her inability to conceive, so open with God about her despair that she just sat in the pew and wept and prayed and prayed and wept, Eli had little to no compassion for her. It says earlier in 1 Samuel that he saw her carrying on in the sanctuary and assumed she'd been drinking. How's that for quality pastoral care? When she asked for a blessing, he opened up the book of worship, read the words assigned for the day, no doubt in a monotone voice, and sent her on her way. It makes me so sad to imagine her pouring out her heart in the place that should be equipped to offer her comfort and peace. And instead, she gets bad theology and substandard preaching. She deserves more. You wouldn't stand for that, would you? It's a mystery to me why and how Hannah comes to hand her child over to this priest in this temple, when it doesn't appear either party had the resources or the wherewithal to do much for her in her time of need. We have to wonder what either might offer her son in terms of instruction. We're talking about a declining institution, a dying church, a failed ministry. The question isn't just, would you hand over your firstborn, but would you hand your firstborn over to that? It's no mystery that when a voice starts calling for Samuel in the night, Eli tells him to go back to bed. I suspect Eli's been rolling over and going back to sleep for years, too tired, too depressed, too weak to offer anything else. We often refer to this tale as the call of Samuel, and it's worth celebrating how God calls to Samuel like that in such an unlikely place, rousing him from sleep, ordaining him to make his mark on his faith community and on our faith story. But change does not happen without context. Yes, Samuel is the one God calls to move the faith community forward, but Samuel doesn't respond without Eli's help. And Eli doesn't help without God's intervention. Had it not finally dawned on Eli what was going on that night, the story might have ended very differently indeed. Samuel is set in motion by God's call, and so finally, at long last, is Eli too moved to see God at work in this young child. I used to identify with Samuel's call. Like many young adults fresh out of seminary, I'm fairly certain this was the text I chose for my ordination some 20 years ago. While neither that youthful nor a boy, I could relate to God pestering me. The question of what I was meant to do or called to be in this world literally kept me up at night, and it took others, mentors and friends and family, to help me shape my response to God's call on my life. And that's a fair and wonderful reading of this tale. It's just that now, a few decades in, I find myself wondering a little more about Eli, who is also losing sleep, but for very different reasons. Samuel was called, but we might say Eli was recalled, called again by God to be open to wherever God was headed next. I've heard people, longtime church members here and elsewhere, talk about how things have changed, and now I've seen it. There are statistics and patterns we can point to in the mainstream Protestant church, trends in attendance, volunteerism, stewardship, and the rest. Most of those graphs headed in the wrong direction, by the way. And then there are things that are more difficult to describe or chart. Subtle changes, cultural changes. It may be a generalization, but what people need from the church seems different. What they understand about it seems different. Just the other day, a colleague told me she was revisiting the language of stewardship in her congregation because too many people were hearing the word pledge and immediately expecting to receive a tote bag or a calendar in exchange for some small monthly withdrawal equivalent to the cost of a cup of coffee. The conversations have been increasing in number over the years about how our youth have to choose more often than not whether they will attend church or participate in sports. When athletic practices and games are scheduled more often than not on Wednesday nights and all weekend long, even Sundays. I'm old enough to remember when we couldn't go to the grocery store or any store on Sunday. And now I will most likely, as I do every week, stop at Festival Foods on my way home. Times have changed. The question is, how will we, the church, respond to changing times? When you are anxious or fearful, sad or distressed, would you trust your faith community to listen for your pain? When you experience joy, do you think to share it here? Does worship, the way we do it, when we do it, how we do it, fit with how God is working in your life? Maybe I have more than one question, but it comes down to this. What keeps you up at night? And are we equipped to hear you, to pray with you, to meet you where you are, and to offer you the kind of comfort you seek? The late theologian and author Phyllis Tickle suggests that just about every 500 years, the church feels compelled to hold a giant rummage sale in terms of the way it exists in the world. And it was her theory that we, the church, are gearing up for just such a sale. We've got some stuff we need to let go of, and we just need to figure out what that is. I can't ever think of that image without remembering one of the best church rummage sale stories ever. A couple I know were ready to contribute to their church's sale. One of them gathered up as much as she could find in the house, including cleaning out her spouse's dresser of some old jeans that she really couldn't stand him wearing anymore. He arrived at the sale later and did some shopping on his own, and over supper could hardly contain his excitement. He got a pair of jeans for 50 cents that fit him just right. We're on the verge of what the Protestant Church has marked as the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, a major shift in what it meant to be the church. And we're going to talk more about that here in coming weeks, but the truth of the matter is that shift was occurring over quite a long time, and though Martin Luther is the name most people associate with the change, he's only one of many who came to know that change was needed. He's just one who let his questions be heard. If something's been needling at you, and if you've been looking for something or expecting something from your faith or from your church or from your clergy, and you can't quite put your question into words, is it of any comfort at all to know you might not be alone? And furthermore, did you ever stop to think God might be working through your questions to wake up a sleepy church and reignite our collective call to serve? Now, I could follow Pastor Nick's lead and let you all talk about that for a little bit, but quite frankly, these are not the most comfortable questions to ask from up here. One of my favorite preachers, Barbara Brown Taylor, says in relation to God's voice in the night calling to Samuel and to Eli that she's often more afraid she will hear a voice from God than that she won't. Because once the conversation gets moving, God rarely backs off and decides to go with the status quo. God almost never lets us buy back our old jeans. Maybe the biggest mystery in this whole narrative is the gradual dawning on Eli that he might just be standing in God's way. The word Samuel receives from God that night is not good for the way things have been, and it is nothing short of a miracle to hear Eli say to Samuel, "Tell me everything God has told you, even and especially the stuff you know I don't want to hear." Talk about what could really make a difference in the church, in the world. How about starting from a place of compassion and humility, from a position of trying to understand how God might be working in someone else's life for a change, and from the thought that no one person has all the answers, but when we take time to listen for each other's questions, we find answers we would never have dreamed possible. Instead of a world where everyone is losing sleep, some of us afraid of change and the rest not quite fitting into old patterns, maybe that's what we should talk about together. If not today, then in the days to come. What's keeping you up at night? Did you know your pastors and your worship leaders sometimes lose sleep too over who God might be calling us to become together? And how can we help each other, meet each other in that place where God's grace can move us all forward? May God bless us as we listen together, talk together, journey together, work together at being the people God is calling us to be. Amen.